What is up, Flesh and Blood players? Today we're going to be talking about the changes to Living Legends that have come in today, kind of unexpectedly, I think, for a lot of people on Monday, October 6th. Essentially, if you haven't seen these changes already, we got CYB is restricted, so you can play a red, a yellow, and a blue and no more, which functionally bans the card, but keeps with LSS's philosophy of trying not to ban cards in deck, just restrict them. Whereas Zephyr Needle is banned and Warmonger's Diplomacy has been unrestricted. I think all three of these are pretty massive changes to the format overall. There's kind of a lot to cover in this video because we're also going to be trying ranking all 53 heroes that are legal in Living Legend going into Philadelphia. I'm going to try and make this quick, but essentially CYB getting banned is mostly a targeted ban at new and CYB Oldhim specifically. CYB Oldhim was already kind of struggling as a deck, so it's kind of, that one's really gone, but CYB New was actually at the upper echelons and approaching that best deck in format S tier. So CYB New going is essentially a very good adjustment to the format, essentially meaning that the deck now has to play in a much more fair axis and can't just kind of get around a lot of damage over time by kind of getting that blanket shield of CYB over time in the long game. So obviously a very good ban, quite targeted, pretty big fan of it. Zephyr Needle getting banned is obviously a big target at Ira, which has been putting up huge results lately. I think winning 2 of the Battle Hardens recently, Singapore and the one that Andrew Wilborn, who came on the channel, did. As well as hitting Zen and kind of reducing his consistency level and ceiling in most turn-to-turns. Warmonger's Diplomacy being unrestricted, I believe this was done for a few reasons. One, the card's very available now and it's probably going to be a very big pillar of the format going forward as a way to counter Rune Blades and some of the mech decks. Definitely like one of those limited police kind of cards that stop the crazy decks in the format from going off too hard. I think this is a really solid unrestriction now that we've seen Chain kind of brought back into the fold. Viserai was very, very strong and approaching like that S tier as well. And obviously Briar was also still in that best deck in format kind of category. So I think these are all very good bans. If you want to read more about the reasoning, go to the LSS article that I've got up on screen now. I think there's a lot of good justification here and it's actually quite interesting from a game design perspective. So overall, what I think this is going to do to the format is it's going to lower the ceiling of kind of some of the more insane consistent decks like the Rune Blades in this format, as well as the Ninjas. And what this is also going to do is bring back up the decks like Starvo and Icelander in particular, and bring those back into the format and kind of let those function as intended to kind of police the more uninteractive decks like the Rune Blades and Ninjas. I think this is really compelling and a really good change, and I think these are all pretty reasonable changes that I'm a big fan of. I think Warmonger's Diplomacy going unrestricted is really good for the format, but also really good just for LSS designing in the future to make future Rune Blades and stuff like that. So the second part of this video is going to be us kind of going over where I think this puts a lot of things. I'm going to be doing this fairly quickly because we have 53 heroes to get through. So I've broken this down into specialist tier decks, which potentially in the right hands, and if you have tons of reps, could obviously win any tournament. The best deck in format, in my opinion. S tier decks, which will be 2 to 3 tier decks that I think interact with the best deck in format. A tier decks, which I think have some weaknesses in the S tier and the best deck in format, but otherwise are quite strong. A tier decks, which is just like solid competitive decks that are reasonable to bring. B tier decks, which target really specific decks in the metagame. C tier decks, which kind of have like really specific niche reasons why you would bring them. D tier, which are very, very like, you're gonna need a really good reason, but they're still like strong decks, so I can see bringing them. And made useless by another hero is anything that's kind of made redundant by like just a better version of the hero existing somehow, like Prism, Sculptor of Arclight versus Prism, Awakener of Soul. And then Meme Hero is basically the Betsy Olympia tier for heroes who were not properly introduced by LSS and currently do not have really identity as a deck or potential. Let's start off, we'll put Prism, Sculptor of Arclight into that made by useless by another hero tier. Oldhim is also going to go and made useless by another hero, particularly after these changes. I think Jarl is actually like a much more interesting Ice Earth Guardian. The only tool you lose access to is Endless Winter, and Jarl also has the potential to obviously play Equipment Destruction, which is incredibly relevant in this format because a lot of powerful cards like Bloodchief Leader, Striders, etc. exist throughout the game, and I think that Jarl is actually like a very interesting like C to D tier pick. I'm gonna put him in D tier conservatively. Let's put him in C tier because I think there's really specific metagames where I think he's actually a very reasonable choice. From here, let's fill out D tier a little bit with some heroes that are just kind of like not super strong. Bravo's not very strong. Marionette, I think, is probably just one of the weaker assassins in terms of choices. Huntsman, I think, goes in C tier. It's probably one of the more interesting fatigue decks in the format, and I think there's actually definitely some potential there. Rhina, you would need to have a really good reason to bring that deck. Marlin, currently just kind of worse than Lexi. I don't think it's doing anything better. I think I'd actually put it made useless by another hero, because Lexi and the other ranges are just so much better. Riptide, same problem. The other ranges that exist are just much better, and the other fatigue decks in the format are just much better. I don't think there's really ever a reason to bring that. Bolton is still Bolton. I don't think it really gets anything from LL that fixes its issues. Dash Inventor Extraordinaire, I think it's just worse than the Assassin Fatigue decks that exist now, and it's worse than Dash.io at the aggro or combo game plan, so I think both of those are more justifiable. Puffin, I think, is like a D tier deck that just like doesn't really function in a way that does anything. I think there's maybe something there with Cog in the Machine and like Tomb Fiendle or something like that. Probably in maybe useless by another hero, because I just don't see what it's doing better than Dash.io, like comboing or playing long games or anything like that. Max, the Hype Nitro, I actually think is like a very interesting deck in this format that's maybe a little bit underexplored. I think it sits in that C tier of like decks that potentially have a reason to bring, because the high octane combo is incredibly strong in that deck. Fang I would definitely put in the D tier. It's too slow for this format into most matchups. I think it would really struggle. Gravy Bones, Shipwreck Looter, I would put into B tier. I think allies are incredibly powerful and interactive in this format, and I think there's a lot of skill expression in that deck still. Not exactly sure if it has everything it needs in the format. I think maybe it could potentially see an expansion card in the future after it has rotated in CC that could potentially bring it up to the A or S tier. Katsu, again, is like, it's a deck that's different than Zen in some regards, and I think it has a place in C tier where like the 9 Bonds, Ancestral Harmony, Out of War list definitely has a metagame where I could maybe see playing it over Zen, like if all the hate towards Zen is extremely targeted to things like Weakest Link, etc. Prism, I think, falls with gravy in like these decks, probably in Specialist tier, where like specific metagames, it's and has to be played for every point, but when it is played to every point, I think it's incredibly strong. And obviously Spectra is still as strong in LL as it always has been. Tyclovosin I would put in C or D tier, probably leaning towards the top of D tier. I think the deck does have applications, but it's probably missing a couple of cards that I think we'll end up seeing if it keeps getting expansion cards at this rate. I think there's definitely some potential there. KO, Armed and Dangerous, I'm actually going to put in C tier because I think access to the Berserk combo is extremely strong, and I really think there could be... I've seen a lot of builds that do something impressive with new consistency pieces from Super Slam. I could see something super powerful coming with that deck. Vinsat, I will say, is probably somewhere in D tier, bottom of C tier, maybe just in the made useless by another hero. I don't know why you would bring it over Chain. Probably has the same weaknesses of Chain, but Chain has much like better end games and just much better payoff. Ira after the ban, I think this is a pretty big one. I think Ira's going to go down to C tier. I think it does have a place as a disruptive deck, but that can be very aggressive in certain metagames where that's valued, like maybe if Gravy goes up or Prism goes up. I think it's a very good choice, but currently I think the Needle ban is absolutely crippling this deck, so I think I would put it maybe at the top of C tier. It's still just barely playable, but you know, just trying to survive out of D tier. let's start with the old king of the format, Starvo, star of the show. Obviously, one of the big winners from this update. All the other decks that were kind of in the same tier as him has kind of gone down, and then he's also gotten access to 3 copies of Warmongers to make those matchups even better. I think Starvo is a really good choice going into Philadelphia and is something that's very interesting and I'm definitely keen to work on. Azuri Switchblade. Azuri currently just worse than all the other decks. I think it's definitely just still in the D tier. I think it's probably made useless by another hero because Huntsman and New just play its game plan much better. Kassai of the Golden Sand, I think C tier, there's definitely applications where I could see Kassai being good, like potentially with where their tempo game plan is very impressive. Definitely still short like a couple of 1 to 2 expansion slot cards to kind of raise the average power level of just like the deck overall. I'm talking maybe like unsheathed type of effects where they're just like solid reds that just like let you put out damage to keep up with everybody else, which I think it definitely is still missing. Kano Drakai Vapor is the most obvious example of specialist that I can possibly think of. It's the specialist deck. It's pretty insane in LL and definitely a lot more complicated to play because you have access to so many more tools, so many more draw effects. Your turns can get so much bigger and so much more complicated. But definitely something that has to put up with a lot of disruption in this format from things like Evanfold and Shock Charmers, but I definitely think the deck is still worth playing, definitely still interesting. Victor Goldmane, I think this deck is like probably in C tier now. I think it has a really interesting place as like a fatigue deck that also can be super aggressive and proactive with cast homes, and access to cards like Test of Strength and Testifying Grip. I think Super Slam gave it a big buff, as well as maybe some of the options in Guardian Mastery Pack, giving it an edge over some of the other Guardians. Volda, probably in D tier for right now. I can't really see what it's doing better than some of the other Guardians in the format, like Victor and Starvo, but it definitely has like unique cases where maybe the draw cards effect could be providing a lot of value in some matchups in certain metagames. And again, it's one of those decks that I think it's just like 1 to 2 expansion cards off from being more of a C, B tier deck for sure. I think we've gotten through most of the kind of chaff decks for the most part. Levia, I'm going to throw probably at the top of C. It's like probably one of the stronger, if not the strongest brutes, because of the fact that it gets access to double claws. It has, Blood Rush Spike. It has a really big card pool that I could see getting expanded on in Monarch 3. Obviously, Blood Rush still like a good card in every format. It has one of the best fridges in the game with Husk. Ooh, Husk is banned actually. Yeah, hang on. I think that puts it down to D tier. Yeah, okay. We have no Husk actually, now that I think about it. I don't think she has the survivability to get that. It does have the Berserk combo, but I think KO does it much more consistently from what I've been told. So I think Levia stays down there. Sidra, I think is a B tier deck. I think it's actually very powerful in LL. It gets access to a lot of really strong tools, namely Stubby Hammers. I think is extremely strong in some builds of Syndra. Not sure if it's invalidated by Fi existing, but I think Fi is also like a very good deck. I put Fi kind of at the top of B tier. He's extremely aggressive. He's very combo focused. He's a bit more consistent than Zen in some regards and harder to target. Zen is going to end up in A tier. I think after the changes, losing Needles is pretty bad for him. But at the same time, I think Zen is just like very powerful, and obviously he now has the tool to end a turn on a Warmongers against the Runeblades, which makes them one of the better aggressive decks into a particularly concentrated metagame like I imagine Philadelphia will be. Florian, I'm going to be talking about Stack Florian because I think that is the best form of the deck in LL. I think it's very interesting and kind of compelling. I think it's definitely got specific metagames like into a Starvo Icelander like World. I think it's definitely like a deck that you just can do some really broken things with. That being said, I think it is just a bit slow at the moment, and I think Resurrect probably achieves its game plan a bit better, so I'm going to throw it in C tier because it does have a use, just not like an incredibly strong one. We're gonna go up to the high tier decks now. I think there's a lot more like compelling things going on over here. I think Dio I would throw into specialist here because I think if you just play the aggressive build, I think you're not gonna win games. You're gonna suffer into the decks like Starvo that can kind of block you out. but I think if you understand how to play the system reset combo, and you understand that buried in the deck and how to get every little last point of damage off on that deck, I think it's one of, if not the strongest deck in the format. I think if it wasn't going in Specialist, it would be somewhere near the top of A or S. Dream for your Iron Song, I think this is definitely a C tier deck. It's like one of those ones that, like, if the meta is just ninjas and they're trying to capitalize off like Warmongers into the Rune Blades and the Rune Blades are getting pushed down that way, seems pretty good. But also like Starbearer and the other police decks definitely hit Doomfear kind of hard. But I do think Dory's Icelander matchup is maybe okay, so there's maybe something there that's interesting to explore. But Throws of the Fawn, definitely not as strong as she is in CC right now. I think I definitely had to put her in that C tier, where I think she is doing something interesting with the Healing Pot combo. I think she's actually very improved because of the fact that the H-Pot combo was like traditionally like into the CYV decks like new. You know, they could just like get enough life to kind of get through it, and then the new just like fatigues you out. Now I think maybe a bit more of a reason to be playing Verdance. I think that it's got an interesting game. I think it actually pushed up to B tier because still got that Storm Strider's game plan, which is incredibly strong. Obviously, if your opponent's good, unlike Kano, like it's not all in on the like big combo turns, so it can your opponent like just playing Shell Shammers and Urban Folds and stuff like that plus AB doesn't just get them out of it. And when they side grade those equipment, it doesn't necessarily fix the matchup into you. So I think Verdance is actually probably somewhere in B tier. I think I put her just above Syndra. I think Syndra is probably like the worst of the B tier decks, but definitely still has a place. Azalea, I would also throw in B tier, probably just above or below Gravy Bones. I think I'd put her just below Gravy Bones. Obviously extremely strong into a ninja focus meta. If the deck just does line up perfectly, I think it's very capable of winning tournaments. Not super complicated, so it definitely doesn't go in Specialist tier. I do think there's a lot of flexibility with what arrows you play. I was looking at it at one point and I found like you can really target the metagame you're in. If you're not expecting much Starvo, you can kind of... No, if you are expecting a lot of Starvo, you can play like fatigue shots and stuff like that. Whereas if you're in a more aggressive meta, you can like play stuff like Nox and just try and centralize your red in the ledges, or you can just play like really like aggressive red leaning builds into mid-rangey / aggro games. Enigma, definitely... It's definitely like near the bottom of C tier somewhere. I think it just like... The problem is like Enigma doesn't really target anything specifically other than like maybe Guardian, and like the what you give up for that is that you're so much worse into the combo decks and you're so much worse into the aggro decks that exist, like particularly the ones like Aurora, Viserai, and like Chain and stuff like that. So I don't think you're like better than some of the other disrupty kind of cop decks. Like I think Starvo is much better. I think Iceland is much better. So I think she has like a really, really niche specific place into like Guardians, for example. I'm also not sure if that's actually not just done better by Prism. I think for power level alone, I've got to keep her in C tier, but like I really like, I'm not exactly sure why you would play her in this metagame. Icelander, I think, is maybe the deck that has benefited the most here. I think Zen getting hit is really good for her. Starvo going up is like another deck for her to counter, so I think that's an incredibly good change for her. I think Icelander like ultimately just like gets a lot of equity out of playing Warmongers at like weird points as well. So, and it got Hypothermia back recently, which was already kind of pushing it up. We saw someone in top 8 of Battle Hard in Singapore, and then we haven't heard much about the deck since. Also, its play rate has been quite low since then. So I think Icelander is definitely one of the better or best decks. I could see it being an A tier instead, because it will still have rough matches into like Zen, and sometimes you might just like have a bit of a weird game. I think I'd actually keep it in A tier, but like the top of A tier, I think it's definitely got a really compelling place in the metagame now. That's really, really interesting. So yeah. Slippy, I think, actually has more of a place in the game than people realize. I think I'd put it just below Verdance, where it's an aggressive, disruptive deck, which, like, from a tempo standpoint is really interesting. Like, if we're seeing decks like Zen and, like, Aurora and a few other things, like, come in that are, like, really trying to kind of, like, no block, but, like, not amazing at blocking if they do need to, and they're just like trying to get maximum equity out of beating the decks like Icelander and Starvo that need to block to like keep up with them, then I could see Slippy having like a really interesting place as just like an aggressive deck that also like can force tempo sometimes. So now we're kind of down to a lot of the heavy hitters. Acilio, I would put higher in the B tier, probably here. Acilio is like a crazy combo deck. Actually, no, it's definitely a specialist deck. Acilio is like extremely complicated. The combo centricness of the deck and the card pool it gets access to in LL is just like incredibly interesting. You get access to 6 tomes, Tome of Fiendel and Tome of Wind, because of course Acilio is a wizard. And then you also get access to like Art of War as an instant, which I think can do some really screwed up things. I couldn't tell you that much about the deck, but I could tell you that there's definitely something there just on like the raw power of the cards it would be playing. Like I could see it drawing the whole deck and then doing stuff like that, but I think the deck would be incredibly complicated to play and very fragile to disruption. Like I think its Icelander matchup would be like nightmarishly bad. And I can imagine some of the aggro decks that can outrace it before it finds its god in a flash could also be quite hard. So yeah. New obviously is kind of targeted by like the spam, but I think New, what it does to New is it does reduce the power level of the deck slightly, and it does make it slightly worse into certain decks. But I think overall it actually means that New is like forced to play in a way that's better into a lot of the decks in the format. So I think she's definitely still in this like A tier of like hyper competitive like police decks that when piloted correctly are really, really solid into the current format. Yeah, it's just like I think like the CYB list New deck is like actually always been like pretty great. It's like obviously not as good as CYB New, but I think it's definitely still like it's always been extremely powerful. We saw people not registering CYB in the New decks when it was legal. I think Xavier McLean, I think we were at KL, Kuala Lumpur, calling at the end of last year, and was not on CYB, and I thought that his list was much harder to beat on Aurora than the regular one. Could be misremembering that, but I think that like the non-CYB version is very justifiable and still a very good deck. Viserai, Runeblood. Viserai, unfortunately, I think was in the absolute best deck in format going into last format, whether people realized it or not. But I think Viserai now is probably the deck that suffers the most now, from this BNR. Obviously, with Warmongers getting unrestricted, that's like a massive nerf to the deck. And the Needles getting banned also made Zen a lot worse, which was one of its best matchups. And obviously things like Icelander, New, and Starvo just getting to fight at a better level. Obviously, I think it just pushes down Viserai to somewhere at the bottom of A tier, maybe to the top of B tier. I think the deck is still in consideration, but like a lot of Runeblades in the format, I think it definitely is suffering a little bit. Dromai, I think a lot of people were too low on this deck to start with. Jude came on the channel and broke down the deck and kind of talked about why the deck is so good in this format. I highly recommend checking that out if you're interested. So yeah, I will say that Dromai, I think, actually has quite a lot of equity and gains a lot from this update. Obviously, the ninjas getting slowed down is massive for her, because of Needles obviously letting them accelerate. Musker momentum is obviously like still a problem. Io is a really big counter for her, so I think this is quite a big win for her overall. She's very quick in this game actually, and she's quite good at raising like a lot of the aggro decks, just because dragons are like incredibly strong and it's very easy to get her online quite quickly. Dragon Scalar Flight Path is a hell of a card, so yeah, I think I'd keep Dromai kind of in that S tier now. I think she's definitely much improved, and I think she has definitely a lot more of a game at the start of the matchup than you might potentially think to start with. So yeah, I think Dromai potentially an S tier contender going into this format. Lexi, Lexi's a hard one because she's definitely gaming in this format. Icelander going up is really good for her. Starver going up is quite bad for her. I don't think she's the best deck in format. I don't think she's particularly good. Viserai seems like it could be a hard matchup. Zen's definitely a hard matchup. New is kind of rough. Icelander's kind of rough. I think I'd put her at the top of B. I really would. I don't know what she's doing in this format that justifies playing her. She is definitely the best ranger, but like maybe that's just not enough in 2025, I think. Chain, Banned by Shadow, we saw Chain come back in the format like really hard, obviously, because of the fact that it got Dead with Dirge back, so I think a lot of people were playing like RuneGate, Piles, and there was a lot going on there. I think it was very interesting. Even before that BNR, we had PCG playing it to 2 people in top 8 of that battle hardened Michael Yazkers and Evan Herndon, if I believe I've got that right. I think the deck's still very powerful, but I think it really suffers from Icelandic getting that extra 2 Warmongers and Starbow getting that extra 2 Warmongers. I think the deck's very good. I think I'd still just have to put it somewhere in this like A tier. I think A tier decks are all incredibly close. I think like the disparity between like B, C, and D tier decks per ranking is much worse. But yeah. Briar, Warden of Forms. Briar is still like incredibly strong. I think Briar is incredibly powerful, and I think it's definitely suffering from Warmongers, but like Warmongers was legal while Briar existed in the first place, I'm pretty sure. And like also I remember playing this one when Warmongers did exist at 3 and Briar was still like a pretty good deck. I think I do just have to put her in A tier though. Like if you get Warmongers with like a full hand by like a ninja, you just get stuck a bit. I think that's really brutal. Lastly, we have Aurora. Aurora is also going to go in this A tier. I think she could potentially be S tier. To be honest, I think she's definitely one of the aggro gatekeeper decks of the format. She has like the better mid-range plan into new. I think her Icelander matchup's pretty great. I'd have to do more work on her Starbow matchup, but I think her Dromo matchup's also like pretty good. Arc Flicker combo is still one of the most degenerate like offensive overlaps they've ever printed. I would actually probably put her above Briar because of the fact that she doesn't get hit by Warmongers. She has great game into all the aggro decks. She's very blocky. She has access to the Runeblade fridge, which I don't think is controversial to say is the best fridge in the game. And I think she's really, really solid. So looking at this tier list, I think reevaluating and looking at what's an A tier, I would put Icelander up to S tier, and I think I would actually just put Starbow up to the best deck in format. Going in, I think in the blind, Starbow has like a fair matchup spread into literally everything. Can't really see anything that's particularly bad for it, apart from maybe Icelander, Dromai, and New, which are the other police decks in the format. I think all 5 of these aggro decks, then Viserai, Chain, Briar, and Aurora, all are kind of like on an equal level. Lexi's also pretty close to that, and then New, Icelander, and Dromai are kind of like policing it, slowing down the format, keeping things there, and then we've got our 4 obvious specialist decks at the top. I don't think any of these are particularly controversial. With the Super Slam heroes, I think all of them are in D tier or like made useless by another hero. I don't think any of them particularly do anything that's like particularly strong in this format or does anything that justifies playing them over old heroes. I think I would maybe put Life in C because I think a 5 intellect fatigue deck is incredibly strong. But at the same time, I'm not sure why you wouldn't just play CYB New anyway. So yeah, I think that wraps up the tier list. I think that's where the state of LL is going into Philadelphia. Obviously, we have another BNR 2 weeks before the tournament. This looks about right. I think once again, specialist tier decks, special. You know, you can do exceedingly well if you're just that person who's just die hard on them. S tier decks, kind of, and the best deck in format. I think those are the decks that have really good matchup spreads into pretty much everything as long as you play them well. A tier decks, just solid aggro decks, and new basically that are just kind of like the pinnacle of the format. B tier decks are decks that like have fundamental strengths but maybe some weaknesses in some of the top decks, and C tier decks are picks that are definitely like reasonable in certain metagames, but definitely specific calls, but they all do something exceedingly well. And D tier decks are probably the don't play / leave them at home. I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you want to see more content on LL going up in the next couple of weeks, we can definitely organize that. Please hit subscribe and give us a like if you enjoyed this. If you disagreed with any of these takes, let me know in the comment section. Obviously, I don't think everybody realizes the full implications of this BNR yet. If you enjoyed this video, please give us a like and hit subscribe. Thank you for watching. If you disagree with any of these takes, let me know in the comments, but I will say that I think a lot of these takes will kind of age well over time because of the fact that the effects of Warmongers and Needles going is like particularly going to change the format and how decks interact with each other. I think it's going to be much more of a layered approach and how things convert rather than like a straight obvious thing like a chain getting nuked off the face of the earth last time. So yeah, thanks for watching.